A single mother, Ariana, is suddenly faced with a truth that shakes her to the core. Her son, Ethan, may not be hers by birth. When Dr. Jacob Matthews, the doctor who has been helping her, reveals that he might be Ethan's biological father, everything Ariana thought she knew is turned upside down. As the secrets of the past unravel, she's forced to decide what's best for her son, herself, and the man who claims to be his father. Will Ariana lose her place in Ethan's life, or will love and loyalty prevail? Stay tuned to find out how this emotional journey unfolds, and don't forget to subscribe. Ariana Bennett's day had already been long before she slipped on the icy patch outside the grocery store. She had spent the morning running errands, trying to balance the demands of her job with her responsibilities as a single mother. It had been one of those days when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. The constant rush, the constant pressure, trying to make sure everything was in place, always feeling like she was one step behind. And now this. Her foot slid on the slick ice in the parking lot, sending a sharp pain shooting up her leg as she twisted her ankle. She stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden fall, and her shopping bags scattered across the pavement. Groaning, she leaned against the car, trying to steady herself, but the pain in her ankle made it hard to think clearly. She was so tired of being in a constant state of motion, so tired of doing everything on her own. With a sigh, she glanced at the time on her phone. It was 3:30 p.m. Ethan, her 5-year-old son, would be waiting for her at daycare. She could picture his small face, worried because she was late again. The guilt hit her like a ton of bricks. "I can't be late today," she muttered to herself, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan needed her. She needed him. But now her ankle was throbbing, and there was no way she could make it to the daycare without help. She dialed the number for a nearby urgent care clinic, hoping they could see her quickly. 30 minutes later, Ariana found herself sitting in a sterile exam room, crabbling her foot, which had already started swelling. The waiting room had been busy, with families rushing in and out, but when her name was finally called, she hobbled into the back area. Dr. Jacob Matthews, the physician who greeted her, had a calm, reassuring presence. He looked to be in his early 40s, his dark hair slightly tousled, as if he'd just come from a long shift. There was something about him that put her at ease, but Ariana still felt the familiar tension in her shoulders. She wasn't used to being helped. She wasn't used to letting others take control. "Let's take a look," Dr. Matthews said, his voice warm and steady. "How's the pain?" "Not great," Ariana replied, trying to sound more composed than she felt. She winced as she shifted her foot slightly. "All right, let's see if we can get you comfortable. I'll have you do an x-ray just to make sure nothing's broken, but it looks like you've just twisted it pretty badly." As he worked, Ariana noticed him glance down at her hand. More specifically, at the ring on her finger, the delicate gold band with a small, intricate stone. It was an heirloom, something her late husband had given her. She hadn't taken it off since the day they were married, even though it often seemed out of place in her busy, chaotic life. It felt like one of the few things she still had left from a past she couldn't quite let go of. Dr. Matthews didn't seem to be hiding his curiosity about the ring. His brow furrowed slightly, and he leaned in just a little closer. "That's a very unique ring," he said, his voice softer now, almost intrigued. "Where did you get it?" Ariana shifted uncomfortably in her seat, not expecting such an intimate question. "It's a family heirloom," she replied. "My husband gave it to me." She saw his gaze linger on the ring for a moment longer before he quickly returned his attention to her foot. "It's beautiful," he said quietly, almost to himself. She nodded, but a strange feeling settled in her chest. She didn't know why, but there was something about the way Dr. Matthews was looking at her, and the ring, that made her uneasy. She quickly redirected the conversation. "How long do you think this will take?" she asked, glancing at the clock. She still needed to pick up Ethan. Dr. Matthews smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Don't worry, I'm almost done. Just a quick wrap, and you'll be good to go. But I have to say, you're going to need to take it easy for a while. No rushing around." She felt a twinge of frustration. She had a million things to do, and the idea of slowing down was not something she was prepared for. But there was something in his gaze that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time, and she found herself nodding absent-mindedly. "I don't have much time," she said, glancing at her phone again. "I need to pick up my son from daycare. He's probably waiting for me by now." Dr. Matthews seemed to consider this for a moment, then offered, "If you'd like, I can give you a ride. I'm heading that way anyway, and it'll save you time." Ariana hesitated. She wasn't used to accepting help from anyone, least of all a stranger. But she felt a pang of guilt at the thought of making Ethan wait even longer. Okay, sure. That would be great," she finally said. As they walked out to his car, Ariana felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had spent so much of her life doing things on her own that it was almost foreign to accept assistance. But something about Dr. Matthews' quiet confidence, his unassuming kindness, made it feel less like charity and more like an act of simple decency. The drive was quiet at first. Ariana's thoughts kept drifting to her son, how he would feel about her being late again. She could already see his small face, a mix of disappointment and concern. But as Dr. Matthews drove, she noticed how his eyes flickered to her occasionally, as if he was weighing something in his mind. "So you said your son's name is Ethan?" he asked after a while, his voice casual. "Yes," Ariana replied. He's a handful, but I wouldn't trade him for the world." Dr. Matthews nodded. "I get it. Raising kids is no joke." There was something comforting in the simplicity of his words, in the way he seemed to understand without needing to say much. But as the car rolled to a stop in front of the daycare, Ariana couldn't shake the feeling that this interaction was about more than just an injury. Something about Dr. Matthews, the ring, and the way he looked at her made her uneasy. He parked the car, and Ariana gathered her things. "Thanks for the ride," she said, trying to sound casual, but there was a nervous tremor in her voice. "No problem," he said, smiling gently. "Take care of that ankle." Ariana nodded, and as she stepped out of the car, she couldn't help but glance at his face one more time. His eyes were still locked on her, studying her in a way that made her heart race. She shook her head, pushing the thought aside. It had just been a long day, that was all. When she opened the door to the daycare, Ethan was sitting on the floor, playing with a few other kids. He looked up and smiled as she entered, his face lighting up. "Mom," he exclaimed, running toward her. Ariana knelt down and hugged him tightly, the stress of the day melting away for a brief moment. She kissed the top of his head, feeling the warmth of his embrace. She might have felt disconnected from everything else, but in that moment, with Ethan in her arms, she knew she was doing something right. As they walked back to the car, Ariana caught sight of Dr. Matthews' vehicle still parked in the lot. He was still inside, watching her and Ethan with an intensity she couldn't quite place. It was unsettling. But she didn't dwell on it. Not now. Right now, she just needed to get home. As the car pulled away, Ariana couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. That the man who had helped her, Dr. Matthews, was about to become much more involved in her life than she ever could have imagined. And she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. The next few days seemed to blur together for Ariana. Her ankle was still sore, and the doctor's orders to rest were easier said than done. She couldn't afford to take it easy, not with work piling up, and Ethan's schedule always needing attention. But she did her best to follow the advice, keeping off her foot whenever she could. The real challenge, though, was adjusting to the presence of Dr. Matthews in her life. At first, it was subtle. He'd send her the occasional text to check in on her progress. "How's the ankle today?" he'd ask. Or, "Take it easy. Don't push yourself." His texts were simple, but there was a certain warmth in them that made Ariana feel cared for, like she mattered in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Then there were the rides. Ariana hadn't asked for them, but she wasn't about to turn down the help. Dr. Matthews would often offer to drive her to work or pick up Ethan when she couldn't manage. It was efficient. He had a flexible schedule as a doctor, and he lived nearby. He made it sound so casual, so matter-of-fact, that Ariana never felt pressured. Still, there was always a lingering undercurrent of something more. Something she couldn't quite pinpoint. Ariana wasn't a fool. She'd noticed the way he looked at her. How his gaze lingered on her a little longer than necessary. How he sometimes gave her that thoughtful, almost pensive look. She didn't know if it was just her overactive imagination or something real, but it left her feeling unsettled. It wasn't that she was unhappy with the help. She was grateful, genuinely so. It was just, everything felt a little too intimate. A little too fast. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, just as the sky started to darken and the air turned crisp, that things shifted again. Ariana was sitting at her kitchen table, trying to focus on the spreadsheets for work, but her mind kept drifting. Ethan was in his room, playing with his toys, happily occupied for the time being. She had the whole afternoon to herself, which was a rare luxury, and she was determined to make the most of it. That's when her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen. It was a message from Dr. Matthews. "How's everything going? I know it's been a few days since we last checked in. Just wanted to see if you needed anything." Ariana paused, her fingers hovering over the phone. She wasn't used to being taken care of. It felt strange, but also nice. She quickly typed out a response. "I'm doing all right. Just keeping up with work. Ethan's doing great. Thanks for asking." She hesitated before adding, "I appreciate everything you've been doing for us. It's really kind of you." The message sent, and she set her phone down. She told herself she wasn't thinking too much about it. But just as she tried to refocus on her work, her phone buzzed again. "Glad to hear it. If you need a ride anywhere, I'm free later. Don't hesitate to ask." Ariana smiled to herself. She had to admit, his consistency was both comforting and a bit disarming. She appreciated it, but it also felt like something was building between them, something unspoken. The way he always made himself available, it was hard to ignore. Ariana knew it was probably just his nature, being a good doctor, a compassionate person, but it still felt like it was crossing some invisible line. The doorbell rang, breaking her thoughts. She glanced at the clock, 5:30 p.m. It was Dr. Matthews. She hadn't even realized she had agreed to let him drop by with some medication for her ankle that she had mentioned during one of their earlier conversations. Ariana felt a slight flutter in her chest. It was a simple thing, just a delivery. But something about the way he had phrased the offer made it seem like more. She opened the door. Dr. Matthews stood there, holding a small bag with a few prescription bottles inside. His face lit up when he saw her. "Hey, Ariana," he said, his voice warm. "I didn't want you to have to wait for the meds. Just a little something to help with the swelling." "Thanks," she replied, trying to sound casual, though she couldn't quite mask the surprise in her voice. "You didn't have to come by. I could have just picked them up." He shrugged, his smile never faltering. "I didn't mind. Thought I'd make sure you're taken care of." He paused for a second, eyes flickering to the side. Also, I thought I'd check in on you. See how you're doing, physically, emotionally, all of it. Ariana's heart skipped a beat. She tried not to let it show. I'm fine, just trying to keep up with everything. You know how it is. He stepped inside as she stepped aside to let him in, his presence filling the small space. Ariana felt a sudden tension in the air, as though the walls of her apartment had closed in just a little. She gestured toward the couch. "Can I offer you something to drink?" she asked, even though she didn't feel like it. She just needed something to do, something to break the awkwardness. "Sure," he replied. "I'll take a coffee if you have some." Ariana nodded, heading to the kitchen to prepare it. As she did, she couldn't help but feel his eyes on her, his gaze lingering again. She was acutely aware of his presence now, his proximity making her feel more self-conscious than she wanted to admit. When she returned with the coffee, Dr. Matthews was sitting on the couch, looking through a pile of old photos on the table. He looked up as she sat down next to him, a warm smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You've got some great pictures here," he said, his voice soft, almost reflective. Ariana laughed lightly, trying to ignore the sudden nervousness rising in her chest. "Yeah, some of them are pretty old. I guess I never got around to putting them away properly. These are good memories," he replied, his gaze shifting to a particular photo, a picture of Ariana and her late husband, Mark, at a beach during a summer trip they'd taken before Ethan was born. "You and Mark look so happy." Ariana's breath caught in her throat at the mention of her late husband. She hadn't expected it, hadn't been prepared for the sudden rush of memories. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "Yeah, we were," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was a good time. We were planning for the future." Dr. Matthews nodded, and for a moment, the room felt heavy with the weight of unsaid things. He seemed to understand more than he was letting on, but he didn't press her. Instead, he changed the subject, bringing up work, and they began talking about the mundane things that filled their days. But underneath it all, Ariana could feel a shift. She could feel that something was happening between them, something neither of them could name. And it made her uneasy. As he finished his coffee and got up to leave, Dr. Matthews gave her a look that was softer, more lingering than before. "Take care of that foot, all right," he said with a smile. "And if you need anything at all, I'm here." Ariana smiled in return, but the words hung in the air between them. "Thanks," he said, her voice quiet. As he stepped out, the door closed behind him, and she leaned against the frame for a moment, breathing in the silence. Her heart was still racing, and she couldn't quite figure out why. Something had shifted, and no matter how much she told herself she didn't want it to, she could already tell it wouldn't be easy to turn back. Ariana couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this unsettled. It was like something had shifted, a subtle change in the air that she couldn't put her finger on. For the past few days, she had been trying to ignore the nagging feeling in the back of her mind, telling herself that it was just her imagination, that Dr. Matthews' kindness and attention were nothing more than professional courtesy. But the closer she got to him, the more things felt wrong. The pieces of her life were beginning to fall into a pattern she hadn't expected, and the more she tried to ignore it, the clearer it became that she couldn't. It started with the ring. The more Ariana thought about it, the more she realized how strange it was that Dr. Matthews had noticed it in the first place. He had hardly glanced at her foot while he examined it, his attention far more focused on the small, delicate gold band she wore on her right hand. The same band her late husband, Mark, had given her years ago. The same ring that was the only physical reminder she had left of him. Ariana hadn't taken it off since their wedding day. It had become a part of her, a piece of her history that she couldn't bring herself to let go of, no matter how many years had passed since his death. The fact that Dr. Matthews had fixated on it felt like more than coincidence. But it wasn't just the ring that bothered her. There was something else, something that Ariana couldn't yet articulate. She had never expected her life to take such a strange turn. Here she was, trying to manage being a mother and grieving a husband who was gone. And now, out of nowhere, this doctor, this stranger, had started weaving himself into the fabric of her life in ways she hadn't planned for. It was the messages, too. The way he would check in with her every few days, always asking how she was doing. At first, it had been comforting, just a doctor concerned about his patient. But lately, it had felt different. There was an urgency to his messages, a desire for connection that Ariana wasn't sure she was ready for. He was asking about her son more, asking about her past, as though he wanted to know more about her than what was strictly necessary. It was on the morning of the fourth day since their last interaction that Ariana found herself sitting in her kitchen, trying to focus on her work. Ethan was at school, and she had a rare moment of quiet. She had spent most of the previous evening looking through old photos, pictures of Mark, of Ethan as a baby, of their life together before the accident that had torn everything apart. The memories of those days were painful but comforting, like an old blanket she couldn't quite bring herself to let go of. Her phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her out of her reverie. It was a text from Dr. Matthews again. "Hey, I hope your ankle's doing better. I was thinking about you this morning. How are you really doing?" Ariana stared at the screen for a moment, the words feeling almost too personal, too probing. She wasn't used to this level of care from anyone, especially someone who wasn't a close friend or family member. It was kind, but it also made her feel exposed, like he was trying to get into her life in a way that wasn't entirely appropriate. She typed out a quick reply, trying to sound casual, but feeling the weight of her own words as she did. "It's fine, still a little sore, but I'm managing. Thanks for checking in." She hesitated before hitting send, then added, "I've been thinking about the whole, you know, the ride the other day. I really appreciate it." There. That was enough, she hoped. But when she sent the message, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just gratitude she was expressing. There was a lingering uncertainty, a question that she wasn't sure how to ask but was desperate to understand. Why was he being so kind? Was it just because he was a good doctor? Or was there something more to it? Before she could think too much about it, her phone buzzed again. Dr. Matthews' response came quickly. "I'm glad you're managing. Honestly, Ariana, I'm not just here as your doctor. I know we've only known each other for a short time, but I can't help feeling like there's a lot more going on with you. And with your son. I just want to help however I can." Ariana stared at the message for a long time. The weight of his words hit her with a strange force. Was he implying something? Was he talking about more than just her injury? And what did he mean about her son? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She jumped, startled by this sudden sound, and quickly shoved her phone into her pocket. Who could it be? She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, there he was, Dr. Matthews. Standing on her doorstep, holding a small bag with a few prescription bottles inside. "Thought I'd drop these off for you," he said with a smile. "I know it's been a couple of days since I last saw you, and I just wanted to check in, make sure everything's all right." Ariana felt a rush of unease but forced a smile. "Thanks, I really appreciate it." She stepped aside to let him in, trying to push down the strange sensation rising in her chest. What was it about him that unsettled her so much? She couldn't place it. Was it the intensity of his gaze? Or maybe it was the way he seemed to be constantly hovering, always checking in, always offering help. "Ethan's at school?" he asked, his voice light but laced with something that made her pause. Was he genuinely curious, or was he just trying to probe further into her life? "Yeah," she replied, nodding. "He should be home in a couple of hours." Dr. Matthews glanced around the small apartment as if taking it all in. "Nice place. Cozy. I can see how it would be a good environment for a kid." Ariana didn't know how to respond to that. She shifted her weight, unsure of how much to let him see or understand. She wasn't used to someone scrutinizing her life like this, especially someone she hardly knew. But as she stood there, facing him, the tension in the room grew thick. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft now, a little more personal. He wasn't asking about her ankle anymore. His words seemed to carry a deeper meaning. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice firmer than she intended. "Just adjusting." There was a long silence, and Ariana could feel the air between them growing heavier. She could feel the unspoken questions hanging in the air, feel the weight of the emotions she hadn't yet allowed herself to confront. Finally, Dr. Matthews stepped back, smiling a little. "All right, well, if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. You know where to find me." As he left, Ariana stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. She was still feeling that tightness in her chest. She had no idea what he wanted from her, or why he seemed so insistent on being part of her life. But one thing was clear. Something had changed between them, and Ariana wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or a bad one. The days blurred together after that. Ariana tried her best to focus on the things she could control: her work, Ethan, her routine. She had learned long ago that if she kept moving, kept herself busy, she didn't have to think about the heavy things that lurked beneath the surface. The loss of her husband. The memories of happier times that only made the pain sharper. The strange sense of unease she felt around Dr. Matthews. A feeling she couldn't shake no matter how hard she tried. Dr. Matthews had continued to show up at her doorstep with his easy smiles and casual offers of help. Sometimes he'd drop by with medications she hadn't asked for, or pick up Ethan from school when she had a late meeting. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the help, she did. But it was more than just kindness now. It was the way he always seemed to linger, the way his eyes would occasionally linger on her a little too long, like he was trying to understand something about her that she hadn't shared. Ariana had tried to tell herself it was just his nature, a caring doctor trying to be thorough, trying to ease her pain. But the more time she spent with him, the more his presence felt like a quiet intrusion, like a storm slowly gathering on the horizon, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to wait for it to break. It was a Wednesday afternoon when things shifted. Ariana had just finished picking up Ethan from school and was preparing dinner when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Dr. Matthews. "Ariana, I know things have been a little weird between us. I need to talk to you about something. Can we meet up tonight?" Her heart skipped a beat. Something about the message made her feel nervous. She couldn't pinpoint why, but she had a sinking feeling in her stomach. There was a weight in his words, a seriousness that hadn't been there before. She stared at the screen for a few moments, debating whether or not to respond. What did he want to talk about? She had no idea, but a part of her felt compelled to find out. She typed a quick response. "Okay, where and when?" He replied almost instantly. "I'm free after 8. I'll pick you up." Ariana's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wasn't sure why, but she didn't want to be picked up. She didn't want to leave her apartment, her safe space, where she could control everything. But at the same time, there was a curiosity pulling at her. What was so important that he needed to talk to her in person? She shook her head, trying to focus on something else, but her thoughts kept circling back to him. To that ring he had noticed. To the way he kept showing up in her life uninvited, almost like he was trying to create a connection that wasn't there yet, or maybe one that she wasn't ready for. By the time 8 o'clock rolled around, Ariana was pacing around her apartment, unsure of what to expect. When she heard the knock at the door, she jumped, her heart racing. She hadn't expected to feel this anxious, but there it was, the tightening in her chest. She opened the door to find Dr. Matthews standing there, his expression serious, though his eyes still held that familiar warmth. He was dressed casually, jeans and a jacket, but there was something in the way he stood that made Ariana feel like this was more than just a casual visit. She stepped aside to let him in, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. "Hide," she said, trying to sound calm, though her voice came out softer than she intended. "Hey," he replied, offering a small smile. "Thanks for agreeing to meet me. I know this is a little unexpected." Ariana nodded, her arms crossing over her chest as she leaned against the doorframe. "Yeah, I wasn't sure what you wanted to talk about. You've been acting a little different lately." He nodded slowly, his gaze falling to the floor for a brief moment. When he looked back at her, there was an intensity in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "I know. I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable. That wasn't my intention. I just—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been trying to figure out for a while." Ariana's heart skipped in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but she had a sinking feeling in her stomach. She braced herself for whatever he was about to say, even though she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. "Okay," she said, her voice quieter now. "What is it?" Dr. Matthews ran a hand through his hair, looking like he was trying to gather his thoughts. "I've been thinking about you a lot, Ariana. About you and Ethan. And I realized something. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Ariana's pulse quickened, and she felt her breath catch in her throat. She didn't know where this was going, but she could feel the gravity of his words pulling her in. "What do you mean? What's going on?" He took another step closer, and the space between them felt smaller. His voice lowered, almost to a whisper. "Ethan, he's mine, isn't he?" Ariana froze, the air in the room suddenly feeling thick, heavy. Her heart raced as she stared at him, not sure if she had heard him right. "What?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Matthews' eyes were searching hers now, desperate for an answer. "I've been trying to piece things together for days, trying to figure out why there's something about Ethan that's so familiar to me. He looks so much like her, like my wife, Lisa. I didn't want to believe it, but after everything, I can't ignore it anymore." Ariana's head was spinning, and she could feel the walls closing in around her. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She stumbled backward, her mind racing to make sense of what he was saying. How could he know? How could he possibly know? She hadn't told anyone about the circumstances of Ethan's birth. Not even her closest friends. And now here was Dr. Matthews, the one person she never expected to find out, dropping a bombshell that threatened to undo everything she thought she knew. I don't understand," Ariana finally managed to say, her voice trembling. "You're saying Ethan is your son." Dr. Matthews took a deep breath, his expression pained. "I think he is. I think Lisa gave him to you. I think she lied to me. She told me Ethan was dead. But now, seeing him with you, seeing how much he looks like her, I can't deny it anymore." Ariana's mind was reeling. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She had to sit down, her knees suddenly giving way beneath her as the weight of the words hit her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's impossible. I don't know what you're talking about." Dr. Matthews kneeled in front of her, his expression soft but urgent. "Ariana, please listen to me. I'm not trying to hurt you. I just need to know the truth. I need to understand what happened." Ariana's breath caught in her throat as tears welled in her eyes. The truth. The truth was more than she could bear. The truth was something she had buried deep inside, locked away where it couldn't hurt her anymore. But now it was coming to light, and there was no running from it. Her life, her carefully constructed world, was starting to unravel, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Ariana sat in the park, the weight of the past few days pressing on her shoulders. She had agreed to meet Dr. Matthews, but even as the minutes stretched on, she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the truth. The truth that her son, Ethan, might not be hers after all. That he could be Dr. Matthews' biological child, not the boy she had carried, loved, and raised as her own. The thought seemed unreal, like something from a distant, impossible world that was now crashing into her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched the golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the path. She kept thinking about all the years she had spent alone, raising Ethan, trying to give him the best life she could, trying to be the mother he needed. What if everything she thought she knew had been a lie? Could she really trust herself to make the right decision now? The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, and there he was, Dr. Matthews, standing a few feet away. His posture was tense, his brow furrowed with concern. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, two strangers bound together by something neither of them fully understood yet. "Ariana," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart ache. "I'm sorry if I've made this harder for you. I know how difficult this is, but I need to know the truth. And I think you do too." Ariana swallowed hard. Her mouth was dry, her hands trembling. She had known this moment would come. She had known it deep down, even before Dr. Matthews had asked her about Ethan. But hearing him say it out loud made everything feel real. The truth, whatever it was closing in on her, and she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to face it. "I spent so long pretending that everything is fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I built my whole life around this idea of who I am, who Ethan is. I don't know if I can handle it if that's not true, if he's not mine." Dr. Matthews moved closer, his presence calm, like a steadying force against the storm of emotions swirling inside her. He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he just stood there, waiting, giving her the space to speak. "Ariana," he said after a long pause, his tone gentle but firm, "no matter what the test says, no matter what happens, Ethan will always be your son. You've loved him. You've raised him. That bond, it doesn't change. But we both need to know. We need to know the truth." She looked at him, searching his face for any sign that he might be wrong, that this was all some twisted mistake. But all she saw was sincerity. And something else, something deeper, something that made her wonder if maybe this wasn't just about biology. Maybe it was about something more, something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. "I know," she whispered. "I know, but it's just so hard." He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I get it. I do. But we can't keep running from this. I don't want to take him away from you. I don't want to take anything from you. I just need to know, for all of us." Ariana's chest tightened as she processed his words. She thought about Ethan, about the way he laughed, the way he ran to her after school, always so excited to see her. She thought about the quiet moments they shared, when they were alone in the kitchen, when she tucked him into bed at night, kissing his forehead and whispering that everything would be okay. She didn't want to lose that. She didn't want to lose him. But as she sat there, feeling the weight of the moment press on her, she knew she couldn't keep pretending anymore. She couldn't keep hiding from the truth. She owed it to herself. She owed it to Ethan. "I'll do the test," she said, her voice barely a breath. "We'll find out the truth. But I need you to promise me something." "What?" Dr. Matthews asked, leaning forward slightly, his expression softening. "You promise me that no matter what happens, no matter what we find out, Ethan stays with me. He stays my son. I don't care what the test says. He's mine. He's always been mine." Dr. Matthews' gaze softened, his lips pulling into a small, understanding smile. "I promise," he said, his voice full of conviction. "No matter what happens, Ethan will always be your son. Always." Ariana nodded, the weight lifting just a little. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the test would confirm the truth that had haunted her for days. But she knew one thing for sure: she would fight for Ethan. She would fight to keep him, no matter what. The test results came a week later. The moment she opened the envelope and saw the words, "paternal confirmation," her stomach dropped. The blood rushed to her head, and for a moment, everything went silent. She looked at the results again, as if her eyes might be playing tricks on her. But they weren't. Dr. Matthews was Ethan's father. Her heart broke in two, and she felt a wave of emotion, grief, confusion, and guilt crashing over her. She hadn't known. She hadn't wanted to know. But there it was, the final piece of the puzzle. The truth. Dr. Matthews didn't reach out right away. He gave her the space she needed to process everything. But when he did finally call, his voice was steady but filled with care. "Ariana, I know this is overwhelming. I know you must be feeling so much right now. But we don't have to do this alone. We can figure this out together. Ethan doesn't need to lose either of us." Ariana stood by the window, looking out at the empty street below. She felt the weight of the decision pressing on her chest, but she also felt something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. She didn't know what the future would look like. She didn't know what kind of family they could be. But for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. She had her son. She had Dr. Matthews. And together, they would find a way forward. "No matter what happens, Ethan is my son," she whispered to herself, a sense of determination filling her. "And I'm not going to let anything change that." She sat down at the table, took a deep breath, and dialed Dr. Matthews' number. "We'll figure this out," she said when he answered. "Together."